Canada's government is coming under fire from rights groups for failing to respond to a recent report on systematic discrimination against Aboriginal inmates in federal jails. A few days ago, prison watchdog Howard Sapres reported that Canadian prison officials do not take care of Indigenous inmates properly. He also said that the number of Aboriginals in federal prisons is increasing at an alarming rate. And now Sapres says that the Correctional Service of Canada has been dismissive in its reaction to the report. Human Rights Watch has also slammed Ottawa's inaction in responding to its report on alleged rape and abuse of Aboriginal women by police. The government has recently been under growing pressure from rights groups for violating the rights of the Native population. Well, to discuss that a bit further, we're now joined by Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, who's joining us live now from Calgary. Now, Joshua, with Sapres' report now, will that increase the pressure on the Canadian government to finally respond?
Well, unfortunately, there seems to be a pervasive attitude among the Conservative Party in this country that as long as they can win 40% of the vote of middle-class Caucasian Canadians, shall we say, that they can not give a stuff about the rest of society. And Aboriginals in Canada amount to just over 1 million people, and invariably they're viewed as an obstacle to the lucrative profits of resource companies who would like to see them expunged and removed from their paths so they can proceed with despoiling Canada's resources. And there is a perception that Canada's government is more aligned with the interests of these big multinational corporations that develop Canada's minerals and oil fields rather than the interests of Canada's Aboriginals. And that has been vindicated yet again with yet another report. Press TV viewers will recall that back in February, Human Rights Watch issued a withering indictment of the Canadian establishment, publishing allegations made by Aboriginal women that the police in the province of British Columbia had been abusing and raping them. And now we've seen this report, which has been published by a watchdog that's a Canadian government-created watchdog to scrutinize the prison system in Canada. Now, we're forever hearing the Harper government saying that Canada is a democracy and Canada has the necessary checks and balances to exempt Canada from being scrutinized by supranational human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch, such as Amnesty International, and of course the United Nations. They're incessantly rejecting when international actors scrutinize Canada's domestic affairs, claiming that Canada can clean up its own backyard. Well, now we've had a domestic Canadian report, which I stress is actually an urgent report. This watchdog has the capacity, if it views in Canada's prisons troubling phenomena, to issue an urgent report to Parliament. And this individual, Howard Sapres, has issued this report saying that, look, in the past 5 years, Aboriginal incarceration has risen by 43%. In some of the prisons he visited here in Western Canada, 2/3 of the prisoners captive there were Aboriginal peoples. And yet, out of 34 million people in this country, only 1 million are Aboriginal peoples. And so we see a reluctance on the part of the Harper government to address the underlying socio-economic factors that lead to crime among Aboriginal populations. And we see a reluctance to even acknowledge the findings, whether it be from domestic human rights observers in Canada or international human rights observers. As I say, I think they're just happy to win over 40% of the Canadian population. And of course, we know they engaged in election fraud in the last election anyway to win a majority. And as long as they can, continue with their regime, they don't have to respond to claims of abuse of minority groups and of Aboriginal peoples in this country.
All right, Joshua, thanks for that. That was Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, speaking to us live from Calgary. Residents on the Malvinas Islands, alternatively known as the Falklands, are taking part in a controversial referendum. Over 1,600 eligible voters will have their say on whether or not the islands should remain under Britain's control. Argentina, which claims sovereignty over the islands, has already dismissed the referendum. In this report,